question and say, oh, we can't use the past. We've just got to use all the new information. We're working on the new information. It's a big challenge. But my message often there is that we can't ignore the past either, because that describes what we've designed all of our infrastructure, all 5.5 trillion plus of infrastructure that we have in Canada. We have to know what it's designed for before we can even tell where and when it's going to be vulnerable, or if we have safety margins in. So this just gives you an example of that. The message that I'm speaking to is that with climate change, extremes are going to become more frequent. The 50-year return period event, which is the 50-year worst type of condition, whether it be wind or rain or snow, is no longer going to be that. So the questions that we have to solve in the very next few years is how to incorporate that type of information into infrastructure codes and standards. And I truly think we can do it. We're very fortunate that engineers aren't used to dealing with uncertainty. They do deal with it for all other parts of their business. And this is one more source of uncertainty. That given that we put the evidence together, we will be able to change those codes and standards, at least initially, to account for the fact that we know less about the extremes in the future than we currently do. But as we get better and better at it, we'll be able to become more specific in how we design our infrastructure for the types of extremes that are going to affect that particular structures over their lifetime. So there are things that we can do. The reason why we're so concerned about changes in climate for pieces of infrastructure are illustrated in this graphic. It's some statistics that comes from Australia, thank you very much, and it's insurance data statistics. But what it says, and in the bullet message from this graphic, is that we design our infrastructure to have some resilience to extremes. We have safety margins in there, but they only are going to take us so far. There's a magic threshold for the collective state of our infrastructure and structures. If we go beyond that, then all of a sudden we will be looking at large, almost exponential increases in our damages. So basically, in this case, in the Australian data was illustrated that you can have a 25, beyond that threshold, which is that dotted line where the arrow is pointing, that small increases in extremes can, in this case, a 25% increase in peak wind gusts could lead to a 650% increase in building damages. So we do have margins, but they have limits. There's limits to adaptation in all cases, no matter which one you pick. So to bring it back to what's for the future, what's expected under climate change, some of the statements come out to say that there's likely that 20 to 30% of the seasons by the end of this century will be wetter than our current wettest of the years. That the effective return periods are not going to describe the extremes, we're going to be seeing bigger ones. That there will be a polar shift of mid-latitude storms, which we're already starting to see some evidence of it. And that there may be a tendency for more intense, there may be fewer storms, but the ones we get are going to be bigger. And that there will be in the Arctic as well. We're already seeing the changes, and they're going to see the greatest of the impacts to come. Here's just an example of some of the work we started to do with some of our stakeholders in southern Ontario, working with a number of municipalities and what we call water management districts or conservation authorities. And so we were able to work with the models, understand the behavior of the climate models, and work with the weather patterns that they were applying. By doing this type of story taking or study, we were able to look at the most intense events and break them down into the components and project them for the future. And our results here, down in those communities, those 4 basins we looked at in southern Ontario, were saying yes, those statements just read are the statements that our data and our numbers for our specific regions are saying that more intense increases in the frequency of rainfall events and increases particularly in more severe events. We also know that under climate change there will be more, we don't know yet, but there are some types of summer convective storms that may be seeing increases in frequency. Still some work to be done there. That the more severe hurricanes are already increasing to category 4 and 5, the big ones, and that this is going to continue. And that there is some work that this question came up, and it relates to the Jacques document that was sent out to you. to deal with winter snowfall. Many of you are aware that we had people that lost their lives last winter in Quebec, and we had a number of impacts to businesses, communities from roof collapses due to heavy snow. Now, people at the time, in fact, at the time when one of the buildings was collapsing, we were saying, oh, well, under climate change, we're not going to have as much winter. We're not going to have as much snowpack for as many years, and perhaps not as much snowpack. But the message is that's true for the averages, we believe, but that may not be true for the extremes. That the extremes are very, very unique beasts, and they require their own special treatment. And in this case, there's evidence that's starting to emerge also in North America as well as in Germany to say that with wetter and warmer winters, we're still going to have those cold outbreaks, and those cold outbreaks have the potential to give us some severe winter storms. And also, particularly if they're packed with rain falling on that snow, the potential for buildings and for those buildings on their roofs. As I mentioned, in the United States, they've had some studies already looking at what they've seen. They found that most regions of the United States experience their most severe snowstorms in warmer than normal winters. Some 71 to 80% of their January to February most severe snowstorms happen when those winters are also warmest. And that the most severe snowstorms, not surprisingly, also happen in wetter and warmer years. But guess what we're projecting for winters? Weather cases and also warming. So although we may see a shorter snow season and on average the snow conditions may be less, that's not necessarily what we would expect for the most severe events. And we looked at on storms in eastern Canada. This just gives you a quick example. Following Ice Storm 98, we did an analysis. The big question following Ice Storm 98 was, of course, was this an act of God? Was this a freak event that's going to happen again? And so it was an analysis that Canada and the United States disagreed on. The Americans just south of the border said, no, it's a 40 to 80 year return period. In Canada, we said, we haven't seen anything like that, and we haven't. But maybe both sides are correct. One of the things we wanted to look at was what would be the implications in southern Ontario if we had a 1 or 2 degree increase in temperatures in the winter. That first amount of winter warming. Are we going to see more events where less of the precipitation falls as snow and more of it falls as mist or freezing rain? And some municipalities, I think in eastern Ontario, are already seeing it coming. And so we started to say, okay, let's do the analysis. So we looked at 46 of the worst storms that have ever affected eastern North America. We looked at the types of storms that caused emergency shelters to have to be set up in communities. Shelters had to run for many days. And so we started to analyze these. We started to look at, okay, what does it take to make a really good ice storm, and what is that going to protect for the future? So when we put it all together, we did a couple of stories. It still needs more work, but this is what the preliminary results were showing. That when we looked at the model, we used weather map typing procedures, looked at the ingredients, we squeezed out of the biggest storms to affect the eastern part of the continent, we found that there is a risk for the longer duration freezing rainstorms to become more frequent with that initial warning. It's that same reinforcement of the story that the more intense of the events may become more frequent. And the U.S. is starting with some of their analysis and the data to find some similar types of stories. But I think the real value in all of these events, and I always advocate doing that analysis when you've had failures. There's amazing, amazing lessons that can be learned, especially when you put together a multidisciplinary team. And that's a word I really want to emphasize, and that's multidisciplinary. Different disciplines working together. When we looked at these most severe storms in the U.S. and Ontario, we found that the risk of major power outages and emergencies increases, of course, with big freezing rain amounts greater than about 30 millimeters. But if you want long, widespread disasters, not unlike what we saw in 1998, we're looking at freezing rain amounts greater than 40 millimeters. But of course, you get impacts in communities with tree damage to power distribution, electrical distribution systems for significantly less amounts, and they are community emergencies, so they are still significant. We had a look at the current Canadian Standards Association standards. It's a standard jointly with Canadian Electrical Association on the design of power lines. We wanted to see if they had enough margins. They seem to be reasonable for now, but if the freezing rain events become more frequent, we said then we got to have a very, very close look at what we're designing that power distribution infrastructure to cover. So all of this kind of points to the fact that we have a lot of things that we have to start considering for the future. That what we've seen has been concerning enough, but we're going to see more of it. So what can we do today to climate-proof for the future and for today too? That's the plus. And I always advocate that there are things we aren't doing, and I call that no regrets, that we should be doing more of, with or without climate change. These things make economic and impact sense, but given that climate change is upon us, they're even more important, because if we are not adapted to the conditions and the climate extremes we have today, what makes us think that we'll be so well adapted to the future? We've got to start by fixing the things that we aren't doing well enough today, and then thinking about the future at the same time. Let's start with the low-hanging fruit. And one of those things is very much disaster, all phases of disaster management planning. You will likely see more disasters and more, certainly likely more extreme events. So we better start sharpening, thinking about our emergency responses, saving the costs and the impacts by looking at the vulnerabilities and reducing those today, and looking at the post-disaster reconstruction. We have to look at our infrastructure and what it can take, because we do over-design parts of our infrastructure. And some of it has enough margin to take some of the increases until we replace that infrastructure. We can work with its lifespan. Some of it may be okay until we replace it, and we replace it with something better. But other parts of the country, I can tell you right now, are already at risk. They're already into their margins and vulnerable. And it varies with the weather element, it varies with the type of infrastructure, and it varies with the region. We've got to start doing that type of inventory and taking stock. Got to look at our weather warning criteria in the programs, because when we're looking at more of these events, we need to have to be able to warn of certain conditions in a very effective way, and as well as the emergency response to those messages. And then we've got to definitely learn what we can from the failures. I'm not going to steal Alan's thunder. I'm just going to set the stage for him. This is what follows. And this is to talk about Ontario's program that many other parts of the country are moving into. Ontario legislated in a very strict way requirements for a municipal emergency management plan in 2003. And they gave the municipalities in the end, about 3 years to do a comprehensive emergency management plan. And when this process started, I was the manager of the Ontario Region Science Office, and I was getting we have 446 municipalities in Ontario at the time. They were all called one by one, saying, what are my big risks? What's my risk for tornadoes? What's my risk for ice storms? What's my risk for the most severe thunderstorms and for snowstorms? And they were saying, give me a package. Do we have a package for my municipality? And by the time we were done about 15 of these, we were ready to put the shingle on and say closed for Christmas. We couldn't keep up. So then we said, okay, give us 3 months. We'll cancel our summer vacations. We'll put a website out. So we put a website